Where is your husband and kids? Oh, right, you do not have any. My sister Aaliyah laughed as she tossed her perfect silk press over her shoulder. The sound of her laughter cut through the classic R&B music playing from the patio speakers. My mother, Vivian, and my father, DeAndre, immediately joined in chuckling like Aaliyah had just delivered the punchline of the century. I sat there in the sweltering July heat, holding my iced tea. I looked at Aaliyah and smiled a very calm and terrifying smile. I leaned forward and said, "Where is your money?" "Oh, right. You do not have any because I have been supporting you until today." The entire patio went dead silent. The sound of the ribs sizzling on the grill suddenly felt deafening. And that was the exact moment I decided to destroy the false reality my family had been living in. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who underestimated your worth and treated you like a stepping stone. You will definitely want to stick around to hear how this 4th of July cookout ended with police cars and an eviction notice. My name is Sienna, and I am 32 years old. For as long as I can remember, my family treated me as the designated bank account while treating Aaliyah like royalty. Today was supposed to be a simple family gathering to celebrate Independence Day in the backyard of the massive luxury estate that my family believed my white brother-in-law Preston had purchased. My parents were so proud of Preston. They practically worshipped the ground he walked on because he carried the title of Chief Financial Officer at a tech company. They loved parading him around our relatives as the savior of our family. But let us get back to the table. The silence hanging in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Aaliyah stared at me with her mouth hanging wide open. The smug expression she wore just seconds ago completely vanished. She blinked rapidly, trying to process what I had just said in front of all the aunts and uncles who were sitting just a few feet away. My mother Vivian slammed her glass of sweet tea down onto the glass patio table so hard I thought it would shatter. "Are you out of your mind, Sienna?" Vivian hissed, her eyes darting around to see if any of the extended family had heard my comment. "How dare you speak to your older sister that way? She is a married woman with a beautiful family. You are just bitter and jealous because you are 32 and completely alone." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my drink. "I am not jealous, Mother. I am just stating a factual observation." Aaliyah wanted to ask about my personal life, so I decided to ask about her financial life. I think it is a fair trade. My father DeAndre threw down his grilling tongs and marched over to the table. He towered over me, pointing a thick finger in my face. "You listen to me right now." He growled, his voice trembling with rage. "You are not going to come to Preston and Aaliyah's beautiful home on a holiday and disrespect them out of sheer spite. Your sister has built a perfect life. She has a wealthy husband and a gorgeous child. All you have is a lonely apartment and a miserable attitude. You will apologize to her this instant, or you can pack up your things and leave this property." I looked at the finger pointing in my face. Then I looked at Aaliyah, who was now wiping fake tears from her eyes, playing the ultimate victim. "Oh, Daddy, she is just angry because she has nothing to show for her life." Aaliyah sniffled, leaning into our mother for comfort. "Let her be bitter. I guess money cannot buy class or a husband." I let out a genuine laugh. It was loud and bright, and it clearly unsettled all of them. "Leave this property." I repeated my father's words, letting them hang in the air. "That is incredibly funny, Daddy. Really it is. Because I am the only reason any of you are sitting on this patio right now." Vivian crossed her arms over her chest, glaring at me with absolute disgust. "What kind of nonsense are you spewing now? Are you drunk? You are embarrassing yourself, Sienna. Stop trying to tear down your sister's success just because you are a miserable woman." "I am not trying to tear down anything," I replied, my voice completely steady. "I am simply bringing the truth into the light. You all love to brag about Preston's massive salary. You love to praise Aaliyah for securing such a wonderful provider. You look at me as the family failure because I chose to focus on my career instead of hunting for a man to pay my bills. But you have absolutely no idea who I actually am or what I actually do." DeAndre scoffed, rolling his eyes. "We know exactly what you do. You work some boring office job pushing papers all day. You make a decent living, but you are nothing compared to Preston. Do not try to act like you are some big shot. You should be grateful they even invited you to this cookout." Grateful. I repeated the word, tasting the pure irony of it. "You want me to be grateful to sit in a backyard that I actually pay for?" Aaliyah let out a loud, dramatic gasp. "You are completely delusional. Preston bought this house 4 years ago. He is the one who provides for me. He is the one who takes care of this family. Is he now?" I challenged, tilting my head. "Then why do I have a stack of documents in my bag that say otherwise? Why do I have the exact financial records showing who actually owns this estate and who has been living here like a charity case for the past 48 months? The color began to drain from Aaliyah's face. She looked at our parents and then back to me, her fake tears completely drying up. "You are lying." She spat through her voice lacked its usual confidence. "You are just trying to ruin my day because you hate seeing me happy." "I do not hate seeing you happy, Aaliyah. I hate seeing you arrogant when you are spending my money." I slowly reached into my designer tote bag that was resting on the chair next to me. I could feel the eyes of my parents burning into my hands. They were waiting for me to pull out nothing. They were waiting to laugh at me again, to call me crazy and to kick me out of the yard. But I was not crazy. I was completely prepared. I had spent years watching them worship the golden child and her white savior husband. I had spent years listening to their snide remarks about my independence and my choices. I had patiently waited in the shadows, building my empire in total secrecy while they built their entire identities on a house of cards. And today, the wind was finally blowing. I pulled out a thick, crisp folder and dropped it right in the middle of the table. It landed with a heavy thud next to Aaliyah's plate. "Go ahead," I invited, gesturing toward the folder. "Open it. Let us see who the real failure of this family is. Let us see who actually owns this property. And more importantly, let us see what your brilliant, wealthy husband Preston has really been doing with his money." Vivian stared at the folder like it was a venomous snake. DeAndre clenched his jaw, looking nervously between me and the documents. The tension was unbearable. The first domino had been pushed, and there was no stopping the collapse that was about to follow. Preston let out a loud, arrogant scoff. He pushed his wrought iron patio chair back so hard it scraped violently against the stone pavers. He stood up, towering over the patio table, and ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He adjusted the collar of his expensive designer polo shirt and looked down at me with a level of contempt that made my skin crawl. "You really have lost your mind, Sienna," he said, shaking his head like he was dealing with a confused toddler. "You come into my home, eat the expensive food I paid for, and then have the audacity to drop some fake printed papers on my patio table. Do you have any earthly idea who you are talking to right now? I am the chief financial officer of a major regional tech firm. I manage corporate portfolios that are worth more than your entire miserable existence. I make more in a single quarter than you will probably earn in your entire sad little lifetime. I bought this luxury estate to give your sister the beautiful life she deserves because I am a real man who actually provides for his family. I do not know what kind of delusional fantasy you have cooked up sitting all alone in your tiny apartment, but you are absolutely not going to disrespect my wife under my roof." My father DeAndre nodded vigorously in agreement, his eyes filled with admiration for his golden son-in-law. "That is exactly right, Preston. You tell her the truth. She has always been deeply resentful of Aaliyah. It is just pure jealousy eating her alive because she cannot find a good man to take care of her." Aaliyah smirked, crossing her arms over her chest. "She feels threatened by your success, babe. She knows she will never have a house like this or a husband like you, so she has to invent these crazy stories to feel important." Preston puffed out his chest, soaking up my family, worshipping him. He pointed a thick finger toward the side gate of the yard. I am going to give you exactly 5 minutes to pack up your little tote bag and walk out of that gate, Sienna. If you are not gone by the time my watch hits the 5-minute mark, I will personally call the police and have you forcefully escorted off my property for trespassing. I will not let some bitter, low-level pushing paper clerk ruin our family holiday weekend. I did not move a single muscle. I just sat there looking up at this arrogant man who was so thoroughly convinced of his own absolute supremacy. He really believed he was the untouchable savior of our family. He believed his white privilege and his fancy corporate title made him a god among us mere mortals. It was almost poetic how completely blind he was to his own impending ruin. I had waited 4 long years for this exact moment, 4 years of biting my tongue and watching them look down on me. I reached over and rested my hand flat on top of the thick folder. My property. I repeated his words softly, letting them echo over the quiet patio. That is a very strong legal claim, Preston. Are you absolutely sure this is your property? Because normally, when a wealthy corporate executive buys a multi-million-dollar estate, he actually signs his legal name on the deed. He actually pays the mortgage to the bank every single month. He does not just quietly move in and change the locks while someone else covers the massive monthly bills and the property taxes. Preston frowned, his face turning a slight shade of crimson. What kind of total garbage are you spouting now? Of course, my name is on the deed. I pay the mortgage from my private executive bank account every single month. You are embarrassing yourself in front of everyone, Sienna. Just get up and leave right now before I lose my temper and do something we both regret. I smiled slowly, leaning back in my comfortable patio chair. I pulled my smartphone out of my pocket and unlocked the bright screen. Oh, I am not going anywhere, Preston. But since you are so incredibly confident about your flawless finances, why do we not play a little game right here in front of everyone? I am going to open my private banking application right now. I want you to tell everyone sitting at this table the exact legal name of the company that holds the title to this house. Come on, Mr. Chief Financial Officer. If you bought it, you should easily know the name of the holding company. Aaliyah looked up at Preston. Her brows suddenly furrowed in deep confusion. Preston, what is she talking about? Just tell her the name. Tell her to shut up and leave so we can go back to our party. Preston swallowed hard. I could clearly see a tiny bead of sweat forming at his temple. He tried to maintain his aggressive dominant posture, but his eyes briefly darted away from mine. I do not have to prove anything to this crazy woman, he snapped, turning his attention to my mother. Vivian, please get your delusional daughter out of here. She is having a severe mental breakdown and it is pathetic to watch. Vivian immediately stepped forward, reaching out to grab my arm. Sienna, you are acting like an absolute lunatic. Give me that folder and get out of this yard right now. You are ruining everything just like you always do. I snatched my arm away before she could even touch my skin. Do not touch me, Mother. I warned, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. And do not try to protect him. You all wanted to blindly worship a man who promised you the entire world. You all wanted to look down on me because I refused to beg for a tiny seat at his table. So sit down, shut your mouth, and listen to the truth. For once in your miserable lives. I tapped the screen of my phone, bringing up my secure document vault. I held the phone up high so the bright screen was clearly visible to Preston. Do you recognize this corporate logo, Preston? Do you recognize the legal name of the venture capital firm that approved the purchase of this exact property 4 years ago? The exact same firm that graciously allowed a struggling, pathetic couple to live here completely rent-free under a highly confidential legal agreement. Preston's eyes grew wide as he stared blankly at the screen. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and sickly in the summer sun. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He just stared in horror at the glowing logo of my private equity firm, the firm he thought was just some faceless corporate landlord who never checked on the property. What is it, Preston? I taunted, leaning forward again. Why did you suddenly get so quiet? You were just bragging loudly about your massive salary. You were just threatening to call the police on me for trespassing on your private property. So please go ahead and call them. I would absolutely love for the police to come here and check the legal ownership records. I would love to sit here and watch you explain to the armed officers how you plan to evict the actual legal owner of the house. Aaliyah grabbed Preston's arm, shaking it desperately. Preston, say something right now. Make her stop lying to us. Tell them she is crazy. Tell them we own this house. But Preston could not speak a single word. He was completely paralyzed by the sudden realization that his entire successful life was a carefully constructed lie, and I was the one holding the heavy sledgehammer ready to smash it all. He looked at me with a complex mixture of pure hatred and absolute terror. I placed my phone face up on the glass table right next to the thick folder. I took a deep, calming breath of the warm summer air. It smelled heavily of barbecue smoke and impending victory. You see, Aaliyah, I said, keeping my eyes firmly locked on her sweating husband. Your perfect white savior husband never bought this house. He never had the money to buy this house. He has been lying to you, lying to our parents, and lying to himself. And if you think that is bad, just wait until you see what else is waiting inside this folder. I reached forward and slowly opened the thick folder. I pulled out the top stack of papers and slid them across the glass patio table directly in front of Aaliyah. The official county seal was stamped on the top right corner of the first page. I tapped my index finger against the bold black letters printed across the center of the document. Read it out loud, Aaliyah, I said, my voice perfectly steady. Read the name of the legal entity that purchased this luxury estate 4 years ago. Aaliyah stared at the paper. Her hands were trembling so badly she could not even pick it up. She leaned forward and squinted at the text. Blue Ridge Holdings, LLC. She read, her voice barely a whisper. Now look at the screen of my phone, I instructed, pushing the glowing device closer to her face. Tell everyone what it says, right under my name on my private banking profile. Aaliyah looked at the phone and then back at the legal document. She swallowed hard, her chest heaving, as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. It says, Blue Ridge Holdings, LLC, she choked out. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and filled with a frantic, desperate denial. No, this is a trick. You printed these off the internet. You are just trying to confuse us. I shook my head and pulled out the next document. This is the master deed of trust filed with the county clerk, I explained, sliding it over to her. Notice the signature at the bottom. It does not belong to your wealthy, powerful husband. It belongs to me. I am the sole managing member of Blue Ridge Holdings. I bought this house for $1.2 million in cash exactly 48 months ago. DeAndre pushed his way past Preston and snatched the papers off the table. He adjusted his glasses and started reading the documents, his lips moving silently as he scanned the legal jargon. Vivian stood right behind him, peering over his shoulder. The backyard was completely silent, except for the rustling of the heavy paper in my father's hands. This makes no sense, DeAndre muttered, shaking his head. Preston told us he closed on this house in June. He showed us the photos of the keys. He paid for the moving trucks. He showed you a plastic key he got from my property manager, I corrected, leaning back and watching the absolute devastation unfold. Your brilliant chief financial officer's son-in-law was secretly drowning in debt 4 years ago. His credit score was so trashed, he could not even get approved for a basic apartment lease, let alone $1 million mortgage. He came begging to my investment firm for a private loan. When my partners reviewed his disastrous financials, they laughed him out of the room. Preston squeezed his eyes shut and gripped the back of his chair. His knuckles were completely white. But I felt pity for my older sister. I continued, keeping my eyes locked on Aaliyah. You were pregnant with your first child, and you were constantly bragging on social media about the massive mansion your husband was going to buy you. I knew the truth. I knew you were weeks away from being homeless because your husband had squandered all his money on bad investments and failed business ventures. So I stepped in. I formed an LLC. I bought this property, and I allowed Preston to sign a highly confidential $0 lease agreement. You are lying! Aaliyah screamed, suddenly slamming her hands down on the table. You are a jealous, bitter liar. Preston, tell them she is lying. Tell them you bought this house for us. Tell them you are the one providing for this family. Aaliyah grabbed Preston's arm again, shaking him with everything she had. But Preston just stood there staring at the stone patio beneath his expensive leather shoes. He refused to make eye contact with his wife or my parents. His silence was the most deafening sound in the entire world. It was a complete and absolute confession of his monumental failure. Preston, say something, Vivian pleaded, her voice cracking with panic. Tell this girl to stop spreading these malicious lies. Our friends from church are going to hear about this. We brag to everyone about your success. He cannot say anything, Mother, I said softly, because every single word I am saying is the absolute truth. For 4 entire years, I have paid the property taxes. I have paid the homeowners association fees. I paid the $10,000 repair bill when the pool heater broke last summer, while Aaliyah posted pictures on Instagram claiming her wealthy husband was spoiling her. You have been living a fake, glamorous lifestyle entirely funded by the sister you love to mock. Aaliyah staggered backward away from her husband as if he had suddenly caught a contagious disease. She covered her mouth with both hands, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her perfect makeup. You do not own this house, she whispered to Preston, her voice breaking. You told me we were rich. You told me you took care of everything. I gave up my career because you said your salary was more than enough to support us forever. Preston finally snapped out of his silent paralysis. He turned to me, his face contorted with pure rage and desperate humiliation. You promised you would never tell anyone about the arrangement, he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at me. We had a confidential agreement, Sienna. You signed a non-disclosure clause regarding the lease terms. I smiled and tapped the thick folder again. I signed a non-disclosure agreement with the specific condition that you maintain the property and never violate the terms of our arrangement, I reminded him smoothly. But you see, Preston, you broke that agreement the moment you threatened to forcefully evict the legal owner from the premises. You breached the contract the second you claimed this property as your own personal asset in front of witnesses. And let us not forget the sheer disrespect you showed me today while eating the food that my money essentially paid for. DeAndre slowly lowered the legal documents onto the table. He looked at me as if he was seeing me for the very first time in his entire life. The daughter he had spent decades treating like an afterthought was sitting in front of him holding the absolute power to render his favorite child homeless. He looked from the official county stamps to Preston's defeated posture and finally understood the gravity of the situation. Sienna Vivian started, her tone suddenly shifting from aggressive to cautious. If this is really your house, why did you hide it from us? Why did you let us believe Preston was the one providing everything all these years? Because I knew exactly how you would react, I replied flatly. I knew if I told you I bought $1 million estate, you would demand that I give it to Aaliyah for free because she is the golden child who deserves the world. I knew you would expect me to finance her endless shopping sprees and her fake luxury aesthetic. By letting Preston take the credit, I kept my peace. I let him play the big, strong provider, so you would all leave me alone to build my actual wealth in silence. And it worked perfectly until you all decided to push me too far today. Aaliyah dropped into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Her perfect 4th of July party was completely destroyed. Her perfect marriage was suddenly exposed as a massive financial fraud. The beautiful home she loved to show off to her friends was actually a charity handout from the little sister she constantly belittled and insulted. This cannot be real, Aaliyah cried, rocking back and forth, clutching her stomach. I am the successful one. I am the one with the perfect family. You are just a single girl working in an office. You cannot possibly afford a house like this. It is impossible. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the glass table. Oh, Aaliyah! I whispered, my voice cutting through her dramatic sobbing. You have absolutely no idea what is possible. And you have no idea what else is inside this folder, because the truth about this house is just the beginning of your husband's lies. Aaliyah aggressively wiped the mascara-stained tears from her cheeks and suddenly stood up. She could not handle the humiliating reality of the house, so her narcissistic brain scrambled to find another weapon. She pointed a shaking finger at my face and let out a forced, bitter laugh. "You think you are so smart, Sienna?" she sneered, trying to regain the support of our parents. "You think having a little bit of money makes you better than us, but we all know the truth about you. We all know what you did to Grandma Beatrice's money." Vivian immediately perked up at the mention of the inheritance. It was her favorite topic to use against me. "That is right," Vivian chimed in, crossing her arms again. "You can wave those property papers around all you want, but it does not change the fact that you are deeply irresponsible. When your grandmother passed away, she left both of you $50,000. Aaliyah used her money wisely to build a life, but you completely squandered yours on some ridiculous internet scam." DeAndre nodded vigorously, finally finding his footing again after the shock of the house reveal. "You lost every single penny of that inheritance within 6 months." DeAndre added, his voice rising with renewed confidence. "You shamed your grandmother's memory. You came crying to us about stocks and investments, and then the money was just gone. So do not sit here and lecture your sister about finances when you threw away a gift that took your grandmother decades to save." I looked at the three of them holding on to this old narrative like it was a life raft in the middle of the ocean. It was truly fascinating to watch them retreat to their favorite delusion. 5 years ago, when I received the inheritance, I told them I was putting it into a high-risk, high-reward venture capital fund. The market took a temporary dip shortly after, and when they asked to see my account balance, they saw a lower number and completely panicked. They labeled me a reckless failure and refused to ever speak of it again unless they needed a reason to insult me. I never bothered to correct them because their ignorance was my greatest shield. I let out a soft sigh and reached back into the thick folder. "Is that really the hill you want to die on, Aaliyah?" I asked, pulling out a neatly stapled stack of financial statements with the official bank logos printed at the top. "You really want to talk about Grandma's money today?" Aaliyah crossed her arms, lifting her chin defiantly. "Yes, I do. Because I respected Grandma's legacy. I used my $50,000 to invest in my personal brand. I bought my limited edition Chanel bags and my Cartier jewelry. I looked like a success, and that is how I attracted a wealthy man like Preston. You lost your money and ended up with absolutely nothing." I slid the first bank statement across the glass table. It stopped right over the property deed. "I did not lose a single penny of Grandma's money," I said, my voice echoing across the silent patio. "I invested it into a startup technology company right before they went public. That initial $50,000 sat in a diversified portfolio and aggressively compounded. If you know how to read a basic balance sheet, Aaliyah, I suggest you look at the bold number at the bottom of that page." DeAndre leaned over and grabbed the paper before Aaliyah could even move. He adjusted his glasses and stared at the highlighted line. His jaw literally dropped open. He pulled the paper closer to his face, as if the numbers were playing a trick on his eyes. "This says the account holds $160,000, he whispered, completely bewildered. "That was just from the first 2 years," I corrected, tapping the table. "I reinvested the profits and eventually used the leveraged capital to start my own firm. The firm that ultimately bought this house. So no, mother, I did not squander Grandma's legacy. I tripled it and then I multiplied it again. I built an entire empire off the foundation she left me." Vivian stared at me in stunned silence. The narrative she had used to belittle me for half a decade was completely destroyed in less than 10 seconds. But Aaliyah was not ready to surrender. She slammed her hand on the table, shaking her head frantically. "So what?" Aaliyah yelled, her voice cracking with desperation. "So what if you got lucky on some stupid stock market bet? That does not make you better than me. I still have my assets. I still have a closet full of luxury items that are worth tens of thousands of dollars. I am still a woman of high society. I actually felt a brief moment of pity for her. She was clinging to a superficial illusion that was about to shatter into a million jagged pieces. I slowly pulled out a manila envelope from the very bottom of the folder. I had prepared for every possible argument today, and I knew she would try to use her designer wardrobe as a shield. Your assets, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. You mean the extensive collection of designer bags you constantly flaunt on social media to make your friends jealous? Yes, my bags, Aaliyah snapped back. The ones Preston bought me to match the ones I bought with my inheritance. They are investment pieces. They appreciate in value, something a lonely paper pusher like you would know absolutely nothing about. I opened the manila envelope and pulled out a stack of 8 by 10 glossy photographs. I spread them out across the table like a deck of playing cards. They were detailed screenshots of Aaliyah's Instagram posts zoomed in on her prized handbags alongside printed email correspondences from professional luxury authenticators. I'm so glad you consider them investment pieces, Aaliyah, I said, leaning forward so she could clearly see the bright red text stamped across the authentication reports. Because last month, when I realized how deep Preston's financial hole truly was, I hired a private investigator to look into your so-called assets. I thought maybe if you sold your bags, you could at least afford to rent a small apartment after I kicked you out of my house. Aaliyah's eyes darted to the photos. Her breathing became shallow and erratic. What did you do? She whispered, fear completely replacing her anger. I had an expert analyze high-resolution photos of every single bag you have posted over the last 4 years, I explained calmly. The stitching on your classic flat bag is completely uneven. The hardware on your Birkin is made of cheap coated metal that is already tarnishing at the clasp. The serial numbers on your luxury luggage set belong to a factory in Guangzhou. Every single luxury item in your entire closet is a cheap counterfeit knockoff. The patio was so quiet, you could hear the distant sound of a lawnmower from 3 streets over. Vivian gasped and covered her mouth, staring at her golden child in absolute horror. In our community, social status and appearances were everything. To be exposed as a fake was the ultimate humiliation. Vivian looked like she was about to faint, knowing she had spent the last 4 years bragging to her church friends about Aaliyah's incredible designer collection. That is a lie, Aaliyah shrieked, lunging forward to snatch the photos off the table. Preston bought these for me from the luxury boutiques downtown. You are just jealous. You are making this up. Look at your husband, Aaliyah, I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip. Look at the man who supposedly bought them for you. Aaliyah turned her head slowly. Preston was completely frozen, staring blankly at the brick wall of the house. He did not deny it. He did not jump up to defend his wife's honor. He just stood there, drowning in the overwhelming reality of his own pathetic lies. The big, powerful corporate executive who had just threatened to have me arrested was now completely exposed as a fraud. You blew your entire $50,000 inheritance paying off Preston's secret credit card debt before you even got married, I revealed, delivering the final crushing blow. You desperately wanted to secure this wealthy white savior, so you drained your own bank account to save him from bankruptcy. And in return, he bought you fake plastic bags from shady websites to keep up the illusion that you were living a life of luxury. You have absolutely nothing, Aaliyah. No house, no real money, and no real assets. You traded Grandma's legacy for a closet full of worthless plastic. Aaliyah let out a gut-wrenching sob and buried her face in her hands. She could not bear to look at the photos scattered across the glass table. Her entire identity was built on the illusion of superiority, and now she was sitting in a backyard she did not own, crying over fake plastic bags. I watched her shoulders shake and felt absolutely no remorse. She had spent my entire life making me feel small, and now she was finally experiencing the exact same feeling. Preston could not handle the sight of his wife breaking down. But more importantly, he could not handle the reality that his absolute authority was being stripped away by a black woman he viewed as entirely beneath him. He clenched his fists and took a heavy step toward me. His face flushed with a desperate, angry red color. The veins in his neck bulged against the collar of his expensive polo shirt. You think you are so brilliant, Sienna, he sneered. His voice was dripping with heavy condescension. You think playing real estate agent and hiring some low-rent private investigator makes you a big shot. Let me explain how the real corporate world works to you. I am a top-tier executive. My complex financial strategies are light years beyond your basic administrative comprehension. I leaned back in my chair and casually crossed my legs. Please educate me, Preston, I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat. He puffed out his chest, straightening his posture to look as intimidating as possible. Leasing this house from your little startup was nothing more than a strategic liquidity play, he stated. He was puffing himself up with empty corporate buzzwords, hoping to confuse my parents. It freed up my personal capital for aggressive market investments. It was merely a temporary convenience. And quite frankly, we are entirely sick of living in this cramped, outdated neighborhood anyway. Cramped, I repeated, looking around the sprawling luxury backyard with its custom-built pool and expansive stone patio. Yes, cramped, Preston barked back. In fact, my end-of-year executive bonus is paying out next month. We are talking high seven figures. I was already planning to move Aaliyah out of this dump. We are going to buy a custom-built estate in the gated country club up north. A house 10 times bigger than this pathetic little property. We do not need your charity, Sienna. We never did. By next week, I will drop a check on this table to cover every single penny of rent I supposedly owe you, and then we will leave you to rot in your lonely, miserable life. My father DeAndre let out a loud breath of relief. He immediately latched onto Preston's empty promises like a drowning man grabbing a rope. You see, Vivian, DeAndre said, turning to my mother with a hopeful smile. I told you Preston had a master plan. He is a financial genius. He is just moving assets around for tax purposes. Sienna is just trying to spin a normal business transaction into a family drama because she is bitter and desperately wants attention. Vivian nodded eagerly, her eyes darting between Preston and me. Thank God, she muttered, clutching her chest. For a second, I thought this girl had actually ruined our reputation. We would have been the laughingstock of the entire church congregation. I looked at my parents and then at Preston, who was standing tall with a smug, defiant smirk on his face. It was truly astounding how easily he could spin a web of lies and how eagerly my parents would wrap themselves up in it. He really thought he could bluff his way out of a checkmate. He thought he could use his loud voice and his undeniable white privilege to rewrite the reality sitting right in front of them. A massive 7-figure bonus, I said, nodding slowly as if I was deeply impressed. A 10 times bigger estate in the exclusive country club. That sounds absolutely incredible, Preston. It really does. But there is just one tiny logical flaw in your brilliant financial strategy. Preston crossed his arms aggressively. And what exactly would that be? He challenged. I reached deep back into my tote bag. I pulled out a heavy, thick stack of envelopes held together by a thick rubber band. If you are expecting a massive cash payout next month, I asked, dropping the stack onto the table with a loud thud. Why are you currently hiding from multiple collection agencies? Preston's smug smirk vanished instantly. His arms dropped loosely to his sides. I snapped the rubber band off the stack. I did not just look into Aaliyah's fake bags, Preston. I looked into the man who was supposed to be funding them. Since you used this address for all of your personal mail, I had my property manager legally intercept the delinquency notices that were being sent to the registered owner of the estate, which is legally me. I slid the first envelope across the glass table. It was already opened. This is a final notice from American Express, I read aloud. Your exclusive platinum card has a past due balance of $84,000. It has been frozen for 90 days due to non-payment. I slid a second piece of paper over right next to the first one. This is a default notice from the luxury auto finance company. They are preparing to repossess the shiny black Range Rover sitting in the driveway right now because you have missed 4 consecutive payments. The tow truck is literally scheduled for next week. Vivian let out a sharp, horrified gasp. DeAndre stared at the papers, his jaw dropping once again. I kept dealing the papers out like a blackjack dealer systematically destroying a reckless gambler. Here is a personal loan default for $50,000. Here is a maxed out Visa card with a $30,000 balance. Here is a notice from a predatory payday loan company threatening swift legal action over a $5,000 cash advance. A cash advance, Preston. The brilliant chief financial officer is taking out high-interest payday loans just to keep the lights on and buy groceries. Preston stood completely frozen in place. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and was waiting in pure agony for the inevitable explosion. The sweat on his forehead was now pouring down his face. "You are drowning," I stated plainly, my voice cutting sharply through the humid summer air. "You do not have a seven-figure bonus coming. You do not have capital tied up in aggressive market investments. You are in debt up to your eyeballs to fund a fake lifestyle you could never actually afford. You are completely bankrupt, Preston. You are a massive fraud." Aaliyah stopped crying and stared blindly at the mountain of debt spread across the glass table. She reached out with a trembling hand and picked up the American Express statement. She read the bold red letters demanding immediate payment. She looked at the auto repossession warning. The luxurious life she thought she had was literally evaporating before her very eyes, leaving nothing but ashes. Preston, Aaliyah whispered, her voice hollow and empty. "What is this? Tell me this is a mistake. Tell me she faked these papers too." Preston opened his mouth, but he could not form a single coherent word. He looked at his wife, and then at my parents. The absolute adoration they used to look at him with was completely gone. It was replaced by a dark mixture of horror, confusion, and deep disgust. The white knight they had elevated high above their own flesh and blood daughter was nothing more than a cheap con artist wearing an expensive suit he had not even paid for. "You are going to buy a $10 million house next month?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "With what, Preston? Your credit score is sitting in the low 500s. You could not even finance a used bicycle right now, let alone a mansion. You are entirely finished." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The barbecue grill was still smoking quietly behind us, but nobody cared about the 4th of July cookout anymore. The perfect family facade was shattered into pieces so small they could never be put back together. But I was not finished. Because as satisfying as it was to expose Preston, I knew my own parents still had their own dark secrets hidden away, and it was finally time to drag those into the light as well. DeAndre slammed both of his heavy hands down onto the glass table, making the empty glasses rattle. He could not stand to look at Preston, who was now nothing more than a hollow shell of the man he once admired. He could not bear to see his precious Aaliyah sobbing uncontrollably over her worthless plastic bags. In his mind, I was the villain. I was the one destroying his perfect family dynamic simply by telling the truth. He glared at me with a hatred so deep it made my stomach turn. "You think you have won, do you not, Sienna?" He growled, his voice vibrating with a dark, menacing tone. "You think you can just come in here and destroy your sister like this and walk away completely unscathed? You think you hold all the cards just because your name is on some property deed?" I did not flinch. I just looked at the man who was supposed to protect me, but who had spent my entire life throwing me under the bus to clear a path for his favorite daughter. "I am simply holding up a mirror, Daddy," I replied softly. "I did not destroy anything. They destroyed themselves. I am just making sure everyone finally gets to see the wreckage." DeAndre let out a harsh, bitter laugh. He stood up completely straight, puffing out his chest as if he was preparing for a physical fight. "Well, if we are going to expose everything today, let us talk about your pristine little financial empire," he said, taking a step closer to me. "Let us talk about how easily I can burn your entire life to the ground if you dare to kick Aaliyah out of this house." Vivian looked up, her tear-stained face suddenly twisting in confusion. "DeAndre, what are you talking about?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What did you do?" DeAndre ignored his wife, keeping his furious eyes locked entirely on me. 2 years ago, when Aaliyah wanted to launch her luxury cosmetic line, Preston told us he had his capital tied up in offshore accounts. We know now that was a complete lie. But at the time, Aaliyah was desperate. She needed $200,000 to secure the manufacturing contracts and the branding deals. She was crying every single night because her dream was slipping away. I remember that cosmetic line I said, keeping my face perfectly blank. It lasted exactly 4 months before it completely folded. She spent more money on extravagant launch parties and influencer gift boxes than she did on actual product development. She made mistakes, but she was trying to build a legacy, DeAndre snapped defensively. And as her father, it was my duty to support her. But the banks would not give me a loan because my debt-to-income ratio was too high. They would not give Aaliyah a loan because she had no steady income. But you know who had a perfect credit score and an incredibly high income? You did, Sienna. A cold chill started to creep up the back of my neck, but I refused to let it show on my face. I knew exactly where he was going with this, but hearing him admit it out loud was a completely different level of betrayal. You did not? I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Oh yes, I absolutely did. He fired back, a twisted smile forming on his lips. I am your father. I know your social security number by heart. I have all of your old tax returns sitting in a filing cabinet in my home office. It was incredibly easy to fill out an online application for a massive business loan using your credentials. The bank practically threw the money at us based on your stellar financial history. Vivian let out a strangled gasp. DeAndre, you committed identity theft against your own daughter. You forged her signature. I did what I had to do to protect my family, DeAndre yelled, silencing my mother immediately. Aaliyah needed that money, and Sienna was sitting on a mountain of cash, being completely selfish. I secured the loan, and I have been quietly making the minimum monthly payments from my own pension fund ever since. Sienna never even noticed because she does not check her personal credit monitoring. She is too busy running her little venture capital firm. He turned back to me, his eyes filled with a terrifying, triumphant malice. He honestly believed he had just checkmated me. He believed he had found the perfect leash to control me and force me back into submission. So here is what is going to happen, Sienna, he declared, crossing his arms over his chest. You are going to take those property papers and you are going to put them right back into your designer bag. You are going to let Aaliyah and Preston stay in this house for as long as they want, completely rent-free. You are going to walk out of that gate, and you are going to keep your mouth shut about everything that happened here today. And if I refuse? I asked, tilting my head slightly. If you refuse, I will stop making the payments on that $200,000 loan, DeAndre threatened without a single ounce of hesitation. I will let the account go into complete default. The creditors will come after you with everything they have. Your perfect credit score will plummet by 200 points overnight. Your venture capital partners will see that you are defaulting on massive debts, and they will force you out of your own firm. I will personally make sure your entire financial life is completely destroyed. I will ruin you, Sienna. Aaliyah slowly lifted her head from her hands. A tiny glimmer of hope sparked in her tear-filled eyes. She looked at our father like he was her personal hero, swooping in to save her from the consequences of her own actions. She actually smiled, a cruel, vindictive little smile. You hear that, Sienna? Aaliyah whispered, wiping her nose. You cannot touch us. Daddy has you trapped. If you ruin me, you ruin yourself. I sat there in the heavy summer heat, looking at my father. The man whose blood ran through my veins had just confessed to a major federal crime in front of half a dozen witnesses, all to protect a daughter who treated him like an ATM machine. He was willing to completely destroy my livelihood, my reputation, and my future, just so Aaliyah could keep living in a house she did not own with a husband who was a total fraud. The sheer audacity of his threat was staggering. But what was even more staggering was his complete underestimation of who I really was. He thought I was the same quiet, submissive girl who used to hide in her bedroom while they praised Aaliyah. He thought I was blindly wandering through life without actively monitoring every single aspect of my empire. I slowly reached out and picked up my glass of iced tea. The ice cubes clinked softly against the glass as I took a long, refreshing sip. I swallowed and set the glass back down, perfectly centering it on a coaster. That is a fascinating story, Daddy, I said, my voice completely devoid of fear. It really is a touching tale of fatherly devotion. But much like Preston's massive corporate bonus, it has a few fatal flaws. DeAndre frowned, his triumphant smile faltering just a fraction. You are bluffing, he sneered. You cannot do anything about it. You are on the hook for that money. I shook my head slowly, resting my hands on the table. You really should have checked your mail today before you came to this cookout, I told him, leaning forward so he could hear every single word clearly. Because if you had, you would know that you are the one sitting in the trap, not me. My mother Vivian stepped right into the space my father left open. She did not look horrified by the fact that her husband had just admitted to a massive federal crime. Instead, she looked at me with a deeply disappointed expression, like I was a stubborn child refusing to share a toy. She placed her hands flat on the glass table and leaned toward me, completely ignoring my last statement about the trap. Sienna, you need to stop this right now, Vivian said, her voice adopting that sickly sweet tone she always used when she was trying to manipulate a situation. Your father did what any good provider would do to protect his family. You are blowing this completely out of proportion. It is just a piece of paper and a few numbers on a screen. Just a piece of paper, I repeated, staring at her. He stole my identity, Mother. He borrowed your privilege, Vivian corrected without missing a single beat. Let us be completely honest here, Sienna. You are a single black woman in her 30s. You do not have a husband. You do not have children to feed. You do not have a legacy to protect. What exactly do you need a perfect credit score for anyway? I sat there completely stunned by the sheer audacity of her logic. My mother was actually standing in my backyard looking me dead in the eye and telling me that my entire financial existence was worthless simply because I was not married. You are a successful girl, Vivian continued, her voice dripping with toxic cultural expectations. We are all very proud that you have your little business and your office job. But Aaliyah is building a family. She is raising the next generation. In our community, family comes first. You have to sacrifice for the greater good of the bloodline. You have all this money and all these resources just sitting there doing absolutely nothing while your sister was struggling to make her dreams come true. Doing absolutely nothing, I echoed. You mean building my own future? Your future is this family. Vivian snapped, her sickly sweet tone cracking to reveal the ugly truth underneath. You owe us, Sienna. We raised you. We put food in your mouth. When your sister needed help, you should have freely offered that money. Your father only had to take it because you were being greedy and unnatural. A real sister would have happily ruined her own credit to make sure her niece and nephew had a beautiful house to grow up in. Aaliyah nodded vigorously, wiping her fake tears again. She is right, Sienna. You have no idea what it is like to carry the burden of a family. You just sit in your quiet apartment and judge us. You should be thanking Daddy for giving your credit score a real purpose instead of threatening him. I looked at the three of them. My father, the identity thief. My mother, the grand manipulator. My sister, the entitled golden child. They had twisted reality so completely that they genuinely believed their own lies. They believed that because I chose independence over a toxic marriage, I was somehow less than human. They believed my assets were community property simply because we shared the same last name. You really think my credit score does not matter because I do not have a husband? I asked, leaning forward. You think because I do not have a ring on my finger, my life is just a backup battery for Aaliyah to drain whenever she runs out of power? That is the reality of the world, Vivian stated, crossing her arms. You need to accept your place in this family. You are the strong, independent one. You can handle a little financial setback. Aaliyah is fragile. She needs this house. She needs her husband to look successful. So you are going to put away those papers and you are going to let your father keep managing that loan. It is the Christian thing to do. I took a slow, deep breath. The barbecue smoke floating through the air suddenly smelled foul and suffocating. For my entire life, I had let them define my worth. I had let them convince me that I was the problem because I did not fit into their perfect little boxes. But sitting here today, listening to my mother justify a felony under the guise of family duty, I finally felt the last remaining string of attachment completely snap. There was no saving these people. There was no waking them up to the truth. They were perfectly happy to drown me if it meant they could use my body as a bridge to reach the other side. "You are right about one thing, Mother," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any emotion. "I am the strong one. I am the one who can handle a financial setback. But you are completely wrong about my place in this family. Because as of today, I am no longer a part of this family." Vivian rolled her eyes, letting out an exasperated sigh. "Stop being so dramatic, Sienna. You cannot just cut us off. We are your blood. You have a duty to us. We are the only people in this world who will ever truly love you." "My only duty is to myself," I replied, standing up slowly from my chair. I looked down at the pathetic group of people sitting around my patio table. I looked at Preston, who was still sweating and trembling in silence. I looked at Aaliyah clutching her chest like a tragic heroine. And I looked at my parents, who thought their manipulation was an impenetrable shield. "You thought you could steal my identity and hold it over my head to keep me in line," I said, locking eyes with my father. "You thought you could use my money to fund a fake empire, and I would just quietly accept it, because I am a single, childless woman who desperately needs your approval." DeAndre sneered at me. "I do not just think it, Sienna. I know it. You make one move against this house, and I will stop those loan payments today. You will be ruined by Friday." I reached into the front pocket of my designer tote bag. I did not pull out another legal document or another bank statement. Instead, I pulled out a small, silver digital audio recorder. I pressed a button on the side, and a tiny red light began to blink softly in the summer sun. I placed the recorder gently on the glass table right next to the pile of Preston's unpaid bills. The blinking red light reflected in my father's wide, terrified eyes. He stared at the small device as the realization of what it was slowly washed over his face. "What is that?" Vivian demanded, her voice trembling slightly. I smiled. "That, Mother, is the sound of your perfect family completely self-destructing." I reached my finger out and pressed the play button on the small silver device. The tiny speaker crackled for a fraction of a second before my father's own voice echoed loudly across the stone patio. It was perfectly clear. Every single word of his aggressive confession played back in high-definition audio. "I know your social security number by heart," the recording of DeAndre boasted. "It was incredibly easy to fill out an online application for a massive business loan using your credentials." DeAndre lunged across the glass table, his large hands reaching frantically for the recorder. He knocked over a pitcher of iced tea, sending sweet liquid spilling everywhere, but I was much faster. I snatched the device and slipped it safely back into my deep pocket. "Give that to me right now." DeAndre roared, his chest heaving with panic. "You cannot record me without my permission. That is illegal, Sienna. You are breaking the law." I actually laughed out loud at his sudden concern for the law. "We are in a single-party consent state, Daddy," I informed him simply. "I am perfectly within my legal rights to record a conversation that I am actively participating in. But even if we were not, do you really think a judge is going to care about a recording device when he hears a man openly confessing to federal bank fraud? Furthermore, this recording was just the icing on the cake. The real evidence is already sitting on the desks of the authorities." Vivian grabbed DeAndre's arm, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. "What authorities?" Vivian whispered, her eyes wide with sheer terror. "Sienna, what did you do?" I reached back into my seemingly endless tote bag and pulled out a thick bound dossier. I tossed it onto the puddle of spilled sweet tea on the table. The thick pages soaked up the liquid, but the bold black letters on the cover were completely unmistakable. It was an official forensic accounting and private investigation report. Did you honestly think I would not notice a $200,000 loan suddenly appearing on my credit profile? I asked, leaning forward, resting my arms on the table. Did you think a woman who runs a venture capital firm does not have daily credit monitoring alerts set up for her personal accounts? I knew about your little theft exactly 48 hours after the loan was approved. DeAndre froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You knew, he stammered. If you knew 2 years ago, why did you not say anything? Why did you just let me make the payments? Because I needed absolute airtight proof, I explained, my voice cold and calculated. If I had confronted you right away, you would have denied it. You would have convinced Mother to lie for you. You would have claimed Aaliyah made a mistake. So instead, I hired a private investigator. I had him trace the exact IP address used to submit the fraudulent application. Spoiler alert, Daddy, it matches the router in your home office perfectly. I had a handwriting expert analyze the forged digital signatures. I gathered every single piece of data needed to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that you intentionally stole my identity to fund a cosmetic line that Aaliyah ran into the ground. Aaliyah shrank back into her chair, pulling her knees up to her chest as if she could hide from the consequences. She was no longer the smug golden child. She was a co-conspirator in a major federal crime. Once the investigator finished compiling his report, I took action. I continued ignoring Aaliyah's whimpering. I submitted the entire dossier to the credit bureaus 6 months ago. They conducted their own internal fraud investigation and immediately removed the fraudulent account from my credit profile. My credit score is sitting at a perfect 800. Your little threat to stop making payments means absolutely nothing to me because legally, that debt is no longer attached to my name. DeAndre stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the brick barbecue pit. His legs seemed to lose all their strength. Then whose name is it under? He asked, his voice barely a squeak. It is under yours, I stated plainly. The bank reassigned the debt to the person who actually committed the fraud. You owe them $200,000 plus all the accumulated interest and penalties. But honestly, Daddy, the money is the least of your problems right now. Vivian started hyperventilating, holding her hand over her heart. DeAndre, we are going to lose our retirement, she cried. We are going to lose our house. You are going to lose a lot more than your house, Mother, I said, standing up straight. Identity theft is a felony. Bank fraud is a federal offense. When the credit bureaus verified the fraud, they were legally obligated to notify the authorities. But just to make sure nothing slipped through the cracks, I went ahead and filed a formal police report with the local precinct and the Federal Trade Commission yesterday morning. I handed them the full private investigator report, along with Aaliyah's business records, proving she was the primary beneficiary of the stolen funds. Aaliyah let out a piercing scream. You reported me to the police, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. I did not do anything. I did not fill out the application. Daddy did it. Daddy is the one who stole your identity. And just like that, the perfect family loyalty completely evaporated. The golden child instantly threw her beloved father directly under the bus the second she realized her own freedom was at stake. DeAndre looked at Aaliyah with absolute heartbreak. He had sacrificed his integrity, his financial security, and his relationship with his youngest daughter just to give Aaliyah whatever she wanted. And her immediate response was to offer him up to the police to save her own skin. You gladly spent the stolen money, Aaliyah, I reminded her sharply. You knew your father could not afford a $200,000 loan, but you took the cash anyway and blew it on luxury launch parties. Ignorance is not a valid legal defense when you are the sole beneficiary of a massive financial crime. You are going to have to explain your fake cosmetic line to a federal judge. Vivian fell to her knees right there on the stone patio, sobbing hysterically. She looked up at me, her makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. Sienna, please, she begged, clasping her hands together. We are your family. You cannot send your own father to prison. He is an old man. You have to call the police and tell them it was a mistake. You have to drop the charges. I looked down at the woman who just minutes ago told me I was completely worthless because I did not have a husband. I looked at the woman who told me I was obligated to let my father ruin my life for the sake of the family bloodline. I cannot drop the charges, mother, I replied, my voice echoing with finality. The bank is the victim now. They are the ones pressing charges for the forged documents. The machine is already in motion and there is absolutely nothing I can do to stop it. And even if I could stop it, I would not lift a single finger to save any of you. DeAndre slid down the brick wall of the barbecue pit, landing on the ground in a pathetic heap. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a low, agonizing moan. His entire life was completely over. His pension, his home, his freedom all gone because of his blind obsession with elevating Aaliyah at my expense. The patio was filled with the sound of my parents crying and my sister hyperventilating. It was a symphony of their own destruction. But they still had one last desperate move left to play. Vivian crawled across the stone patio on her hands and knees until she reached Preston's expensive leather shoes. She grabbed his pant leg completely, abandoning whatever dignity she had left. "Preston, you have to help us," Vivian sobbed, looking up at him with wild, desperate eyes. "You are a powerful man. You have connections. You are a chief financial officer at a major corporation. You have to call your corporate lawyers right now and make this go away. Please do not let her send your father to federal prison." DeAndre scrambled to his feet, leaning heavily against the brick wall. He pointed a shaky finger at me while looking at his son-in-law. "That is right, Preston," DeAndre said, his voice catching in his throat. "This girl thinks she can ruin us because she hired some cheap private investigator, but she does not know how the real world works. You have access to the best legal minds in the entire state. You have white shoe lawyers on retainer. You can crush her. You can make these ridiculous charges disappear before the ink on the police report even dries." Preston looked down at my mother crying at his feet and my father begging for his salvation. For a few minutes, he had been entirely stripped of his power, exposed as a fraud, drowning in massive debt. He had been standing there silently panicking about the car repossession and the frozen credit cards. But the intoxicating drug of their blind worship was simply too strong for his massive ego to resist. The color slowly returned to his face. He straightened his shoulders and puffed out his chest once again, completely ignoring the stack of collection notices sitting right behind him on the table. He needed to feel like the white savior again. He needed to be the absolute god of this family. Aaliyah grabbed Preston's arm, her fake acrylic nails digging deeply into his skin. "Please, baby," Aaliyah pleaded. "She reported me to the Federal Trade Commission. They are going to audit my cosmetic business. They are going to look at my bank accounts. You have to protect me. Tell your lawyers to sue her for everything she has. Tell them to bury her so deep in legal fees, she will have to drop the charges to survive. Make her pay for doing this to us." Preston let out a slow, arrogant breath. A cruel smirk spread across his face as he looked over at me. He actually believed his own hype. He believed his corporate title gave him the ultimate authority to bend the law to his will. He thought the rules did not apply to men who looked like him. "You really stepped in it this time," Sienna Preston sneered, adjusting his collar to look more professional. "You thought you could play the system, but you just woke up a sleeping giant. I tried to go easy on you because you are my wife's sister, but now the gloves are completely off." I stood there silently watching the absolute delusion unfolding before my eyes. My parents were actively ignoring the fact that Preston could not even afford his luxury car payment. They had just seen his past due notices and his payday loan defaults. Yet they were so deeply conditioned to believe in his superiority that they were betting their freedom on a man who was moments away from total bankruptcy. It was a tragic display of internalized inferiority. They would rather beg a broke white man for salvation than respect the immense power and wealth their own black daughter had built from the ground up. My legal team at the firm handles multi-million-dollar corporate litigations every single day. Preston boasted, his voice booming confidently across the yard. "We have powerful judges on speed dial. We have senior partners who play golf with the district attorney every weekend. A little federal fraud complaint filed by a nobody like you is nothing but a minor inconvenience to men like me. I will have my lawyers draft a massive cease and desist order before the sun goes down today. DeAndre let out a long breath of relief, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He crossed his arms, looking at me with that familiar arrogant sneer returning to his face. You hear that Sienna DeAndre taunted his confidence completely restored. You are completely out of your league. You messed with the wrong man. Preston is going to wipe the floor with you, and when he is done, I am going to make sure you never show your face in our community again. You are dead to us. I am going to sue you for criminal extortion, Preston continued, taking an aggressive step toward me. I am going to sue you for defamation of character and intentional infliction of emotional distress. By the time my legal team is finished ripping your life apart, you will not even have a single penny left to your name. I will take your little venture capital firm. I will take this house back legally. I will leave you completely bankrupt and begging for mercy on the streets. You are going to regret the day you ever crossed my family. I tilted my head, studying him as if he were a fascinating biological specimen in a petri dish. It was genuinely incredible to witness such a profound level of arrogance. It was almost pathological how quickly he could construct a false reality to protect his fragile ego. You are going to use your corporate lawyers to crush me, I asked, keeping my tone perfectly conversational and calm. The lawyers paid for by the company you work for. Absolutely. Preston shot back, his smirk growing wider and more vicious. The full aggressive force of the corporate legal department will be aimed directly at your head. I am a top-tier executive, Sienna. They protect their own. When I make the call, they will drop absolutely everything to defend my family and destroy anyone who threatens my reputation or my assets. The afternoon sun was beating down on the patio, but the air felt entirely frozen. The ribs on the barbecue grill had started to burn, sending a thick, bitter smoke into the sky. It was the perfect backdrop for the utter disaster happening in the yard. I gestured slowly toward the expensive smartphone sitting in his front pocket. Then, what exactly are you waiting for, Preston? I asked, offering him a polite, encouraging smile. Call them. Call your highly paid corporate lawyers right now. Put them on speakerphone so we can all hear the destruction. Let us hear how quickly they jump to defend a man who is currently hiding from predatory payday lenders. Let us see how eager they are to squash a federal investigation for the criminal father-in-law of their chief financial officer. Aaliyah wiped her eyes, a triumphant look, replacing her previous terror. Do it, Preston. Aaliyah urged, her voice filled with pure venom. Call them right now and ruin her. Show her what real power looks like. Show her what happens when she tries to destroy our perfect family. Prove to her that she is nothing compared to you. Preston scoffed loudly, as if my challenge was the most pathetic thing he had ever heard. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers moving quickly across the bright screen to find his contacts list. You asked for this, Sienna, Preston warned, holding the phone up for me to see the screen dialing. You brought this entirely on yourself. I am going to truly enjoy watching you lose absolutely everything. Preston slammed his phone down into the center of the glass patio table, right next to the puddle of spilled sweet tea and the stack of unpaid collection notices. He tapped the speakerphone icon with an aggressive jab of his finger. The loud, hollow sound of the phone ringing began to echo across the backyard. It was a slow, rhythmic tone that Preston clearly believed sounded like the ticking of a bomb he was about to drop directly onto my life. He crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair, offering me a wide, condescending smile. My father DeAndre let out a sharp breath of relief. He reached out and grabbed my mother's hand, squeezing it tightly. You see, Vivian, DeAndre muttered, his voice filled with a desperate hope. I told you Preston would handle this. He is not going to let this bitter girl destroy our family with her ridiculous little private investigator report. The corporate lawyers are going to squash her like a bug. Vivian nodded eagerly, her tear-stained face twisting into a nasty sneer. You should have just walked away when you had the chance, Sienna, my mother spat. You just had to push him. You just had to be the smart one. Now you are going to lose everything because you do not know your place." The phone continued to ring. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. The silence between the tones was heavy and suffocating, but I did not break my eye contact with Preston. I simply watched him perform his little act of dominance. Aaliyah sat up straighter in her chair. The sheer terror she had displayed just moments ago when I mentioned the Federal Trade Commission was completely gone. She wiped the last remaining tear from her cheek and flipped her perfect silk press over her shoulder. The sound of her husband's expensive lawyer being summoned gave her a sudden rush of extreme artificial confidence. She looked at me with a deeply malicious glint in her eyes, deciding it was the perfect time to attack the only thing she thought I was insecure about. "You know," Sienna Aaliyah started, her voice dripping with pure toxic arrogance, "it is actually pathetic watching you try to ruin my marriage. It really is. You are doing all of this because you are completely obsessed with my life. You are so desperately lonely that you have to try and tear down the love Preston and I share, just to make yourself feel better." I did not respond. I just let the phone ring a 4th time. "You can buy a house and you can hire a private investigator." Aaliyah continued, leaning forward and pointing a perfectly manicured fake nail at me. "But you cannot buy a man who actually wants you. That is why Julian dumped you last year. Do you remember that? Do you remember how quickly he packed his bags and ran away from you?" The mention of my ex-boyfriend caused a collective cruel chuckle to ripple through my family. Even Preston let out a low, mocking laugh while waiting for his lawyer to pick up the line. "Julian was a good man," Aaliyah bragged, her voice rising over the sound of the ringing phone. "He was handsome and successful, but he could not stand being around you. He told me himself that you were completely cold and unlovable. He said being in a relationship with you was like dating a calculator. You were always working, always plotting, and never behaving like a real woman. He wanted someone with warmth and beauty, someone who knew how to treat a man. He realized you would never be that woman, so he threw you away exactly like trash." Vivian nodded in agreement, completely validating Aaliyah's cruel taunts. "She is right, Sienna," Vivian chimed in. "Julian saw right through your little act. Men do not want a woman who is constantly trying to be the boss. They want a woman who knows how to be a wife. You drove him away with your endless ambition, and now you are sitting here trying to punish your sister because she knows how to keep a man happy." It was genuinely fascinating watching them work together to rewrite history. They loved the narrative that Julian had broken my heart because it made them feel superior. They loved believing that my financial success came at the cost of my personal happiness. They thought Julian leaving was the ultimate proof that I was a defective woman. I looked at Aaliyah, watching the smug, triumphant smile spread across her face. She honestly thought she had just delivered a fatal blow to my ego. She thought reminding me of Julian would make me crumble and beg for mercy before Preston's lawyer finally answered the phone. "You are absolutely right, Aaliyah," I said, my voice perfectly calm and level. "Julian did leave very suddenly. He packed his bags in the middle of the night and moved completely across the country. And you are also right about one other thing. I was always working. I was always plotting. Which is exactly why I know the real reason he ran away." Aaliyah frowned slightly, her triumphant smile faltering just a tiny fraction. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "He ran away because you are a miserable person. There is no secret reason." I reached back into my tote bag. My fingers brushed against the small external hard drive I had packed specifically for this exact moment. "Oh, Aaliyah," I whispered, shaking my head slowly. "You really should have learned by now that I never make a claim without the receipts to back it up. You think Julian left because I was too focused on my career? But the truth is, Julian left because I gave him a choice between running away or having his life completely destroyed by the evidence I found on his digital devices." The phone on the table rang for a 5th time. The corporate lawyer was taking an unusually long time to answer. Preston glanced down at the screen, a brief flash of annoyance crossing his face, but he quickly looked back up at me, eager to watch his wife tear me apart. Aaliyah crossed her arms, acting completely unbothered. but I could see the tiny pulse beating rapidly at the base of her throat. "What evidence?" Aaliyah demanded, her voice pitching up slightly. "You are just making things up again to sound important." Julian did not have any secrets. I pulled my own smartphone out of my pocket and unlocked the bright screen. "I did not need to make anything up, Aaliyah," I replied smoothly. "And since we are all sitting here waiting for Preston's very important phone call to connect, I think this is the perfect time to share a little presentation I prepared. I think Preston would be highly interested to know exactly what kind of warmth and beauty his perfect wife was offering to my boyfriend behind my back." Preston's head snapped up. He looked at Aaliyah, his brow furrowed in sudden deep confusion. Aaliyah's face lost all of its color, instantly turning ashen in the bright summer sun. The mocking laughter that had just filled the patio completely died, leaving nothing but the sound of the ringing phone and the heavy, suffocating weight of the truth hovering right above them. I tapped the screen mirroring icon on my smartphone and swiped my finger upward. The massive 75-inch smart television mounted on the brick wall of the patio suddenly chimed softly. The screen flickered from a generic screensaver of a tropical beach to the stark bright white of a digital photo gallery. Preston slowly turned his head away from the ringing phone on the table and looked up at the television. The first image I projected was a massive high-definition screenshot of a text message exchange. The contact name at the very top of the screen clearly read Julian with a red heart emoji right next to it. But the text bubbles were not blue, they were green, and the phone number displayed just beneath the name belonged exclusively to Aaliyah. "Read the date at the top of the screen, Aaliyah," I instructed, my voice echoing coldly over the quiet patio. "Tell your loving husband exactly where you were on the weekend of October 14th last year." Preston squinted at the bright screen, his eyes darting back and forth as he quickly read the messages. "October 14th. He whispered, his voice trembling as the realization hit him. "That was the weekend you told me you were going to a wellness retreat with your girlfriends in Miami. You said you needed a break from the stress of being a mother." Aaliyah let out a high-pitched gasp and lunged toward the television. "Turn it off!" she screamed, her voice cracking in pure, animalistic panic. "Turn it off right now, Sienna. It is a fake. She is editing these photos. Preston, do not look at it. Please just look at me." But Preston could not look away. I swiped my finger to the next image in the secure folder. It was a photograph taken inside a very familiar luxury hotel room downtown. The digital timestamp stamped in the corner matched the exact weekend she was supposed to be in Miami. The photo showed Julian lying in the background on the hotel bed, but the person taking the selfie in the bathroom mirror, wearing nothing but one of his oversized dress shirts, was undeniably Aaliyah. Her face was crystal clear. Her custom diamond wedding ring, the one Preston had supposedly gone into massive debt to buy for her, was sparkling right in the foreground of the picture. The phone on the table finally stopped ringing. It went straight to the corporate lawyer's voicemail. "Please leave a message," the automated voice cheerfully announced into the tense air, but nobody on the patio was paying attention to the phone anymore. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sound of Aaliyah sobbing frantically as she clawed at the edge of the television screen, desperately trying to find the hidden power button. Preston stood up slowly from his chair. He looked like a man who had just been shot directly in the chest and was simply waiting for the fatal pain to register in his brain. He walked toward the television, his expensive leather shoes dragging heavily across the stone pavers. He stopped just a few feet away from the screen, staring blindly at a new text message thread I had just swiped to. "I cannot wait to see you tonight," the massive text message from Aaliyah read. "Preston is working late again, trying to fix his ridiculous credit card problems. He is so clueless and stressed he cannot even perform in the bedroom anymore. Just park around the corner so the nosy neighbors do not see your car. I will leave the side gate unlocked for you." Preston read the words out loud. His voice was completely hollow and entirely devoid of the arrogance and bravado he had been parading around just minutes ago. The words completely shattered what little was left of his massive, fragile ego. "You brought him here. Preston asked, his eyes glued to the bright screen. You brought another man into my house, into the bed we sleep in while I was out taking payday loans to pay for your fake designer bags. Technically, it is my house, I corrected quietly from the table, but neither of them paid any attention to me. Aaliyah backed away from the television, shaking her head wildly. No, baby. Please, you have to listen to me, Aaliyah cried, reaching out to touch Preston's arm. It meant absolutely nothing to me. He was obsessed with me. He kept pursuing me, and I just made one stupid mistake because I was feeling lonely. I love you, Preston. You are my husband. He was just a horrible man who took advantage of a weak moment in our marriage. I swiped to the next slide. It was an audio file. I tapped play on my phone screen, and the sound system wired through the patio speakers came to life. It was Aaliyah's voice, laughing softly, followed by the distinct rustling of heavy hotel sheets. I am so glad you are finally leaving, Sienna. The recording of Aaliyah whispered playfully. She is so boring and stiff, Julian. I do not know how you stood being with her for 2 whole years. You deserve a real woman who knows how to treat you right. When are you going to tell her it is over so we do not have to hide in these hotels anymore? Preston staggered backward as if the audio recording had physically struck him across the face. He bumped hard into the brick barbecue grill, his hands gripping the cold metal to keep himself from collapsing to the ground. He looked at his wife, the beautiful golden child he had worshipped and funded with stolen money. The woman he had destroyed his own life and career for just to keep her draped in a lifestyle she felt entitled to. She was not a victim. She was not a faithful, loving wife. She was a deceitful, manipulative woman who had happily slept with her sister's boyfriend in the very house her sister secretly owned and paid for. Vivian sat completely frozen in her patio chair, her mouth hanging wide open. The narrative she had clung to her entire life, the absolute belief that Aaliyah was the perfect daughter who did everything right, was completely obliterated in front of her eyes. She could not find a single excuse to justify this. She could not blame this on my ambition or my lack of a husband. The undeniable evidence was 75 inches wide and broadcasting in high definition for the entire neighborhood to potentially hear. DeAndre looked away from the screen, his shoulders slumping in absolute total defeat. He had committed federal bank fraud and risked going to prison to fund the cosmetic company of a woman who was using his stolen money to book hotel rooms for her illicit affairs. The sickening realization of his own foolishness washed over his aging face. Preston Aaliyah sobbed, dropping to her knees on the hard stone patio right in front of him. She grabbed his pant legs, burying her tear-soaked face in his knees. Please do not leave me. We have a child together. We have a family to think about. I will do anything you want. I will go to church therapy. I will make it up to you every single day. Please do not let her ruin our beautiful marriage. Preston looked down at her with a look of pure, absolute revulsion. He violently yanked his legs away from her desperate grasp, causing her to fall forward onto the rough stone pavers. Do not ever touch me again. Preston spat, his voice dripping with pure toxic venom. You absolutely disgust me. You are nothing but a cheap, lying cheat. Aaliyah lay on the ground, weeping hysterically, her perfect dress ruined and her fake bags forgotten. The perfect family cookout had turned into a complete massacre of lies. Every single secret they had buried, every single manipulation they had used to elevate themselves above me, had been dragged out into the blazing summer sun and burned entirely to ashes. But the destruction was still not quite finished. Preston began to pace back and forth across the stone patio like a trapped animal. He ran his hands aggressively through his perfectly styled hair, destroying the neat corporate look he had carefully crafted for the holiday weekend. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. You ungrateful little tramp! Preston roared, his voice echoing harshly off the brick walls of the house. I ruined my entire life for you. I took out payday loans with predatory interest rates just to keep the lights on so you could pretend to be a wealthy housewife on the internet. I committed financial suicide to buy you everything you ever wanted, and you repay me by bringing another man into the very house I was destroying myself to maintain." Aaliyah pushed herself up from the rough stone pavers. The desperate sobbing wife routine vanished instantly. The golden child mask completely shattered, revealing the vicious entitled woman that had always been lurking underneath the surface. She pointed a shaking finger at him, her eyes burning with pure venom. "You did not buy me everything I ever wanted," Aaliyah screamed back, her voice shrill and piercing. "You bought me cheap plastic garbage from overseas. You made me look like an absolute fool in front of my friends and the entire community. You paraded around here acting like a powerful executive, but you are nothing but a broke, pathetic loser who cannot even afford his own luxury car payment." The patio erupted into absolute chaos. They stood mere inches apart, screaming the most vile, hateful things they could possibly think of. Every insecurity, every hidden resentment they had harbored throughout their entire fraudulent marriage was weaponized and thrown like daggers. Preston mocked her failed cosmetic line, calling her a lazy parasite who contributed absolutely nothing to their household and only knew how to drain his bank accounts. Aaliyah retaliated by mocking his massive debt and his fragile ego, explicitly comparing him to Julian in ways that made my mother gasp in sheer horror. DeAndre tried to step between them, raising his hands in a desperate attempt to restore peace to his crumbling kingdom. "Preston, you need to calm down right now," DeAndre pleaded, his voice shaking with fear. "We can fix this mess. We are a family. We can figure out a way to move past this and protect our reputation." Preston violently shoved my father's hands away, nearly knocking the older man off balance. "Do not touch me, you pathetic old criminal!" Preston spat, glaring at DeAndre with utter disgust. "There is no family here anymore. There is no moving past this. You are going to federal prison for bank fraud, and your precious golden daughter is a cheap, lying adulterer. I am going to divorce her and leave both of you to rot in the massive legal mess you created. I am washing my hands of this entire disgusting family right now." Vivian wailed loudly, covering her ears as if that action could somehow block out the reality of her world completely collapsing. The perfect image she had cultivated for decades was entirely gone. Her church friends would definitely find out. The entire community would soon know that her husband was a common thief, her daughter was a cheat, and her wealthy son-in-law was a fraudulent deadbeat drowning in debt. She slumped back into her patio chair, weeping for her lost social status. I remained seated at the table, calmly taking another sip of my iced tea. I simply watched the destruction unfold. They had spent my entire life tearing me down, and now they were doing the exact same thing to each other, without any hesitation. Suddenly, the sharp buzzing of a cell phone cut through the vicious screaming match. Preston's phone, which was still sitting on the glass table next to the puddle of sweet tea, lit up brightly. The caller identification displayed the name of the senior corporate counsel at his tech firm. Preston stopped screaming mid-sentence. He stared at the glowing screen. He took a deep breath, smoothing down the front of his wrinkled polo shirt, as if the lawyer could somehow see him through the mobile device. He looked over at me, a desperate, arrogant smirk returning to his flushed face. He actually thought this phone call was going to save him from the nightmare. He truly believed his corporate shield was finally arriving to rescue him from the wreckage of his personal life and crush me into submission. "You are about to learn a very hard lesson about real power," Sienna Preston threatened, leaning over the table. He pressed the green accept button and immediately activated the speakerphone function so the entire yard could hear his triumphant moment. "Richard, it is, Preston," he barked into the phone, adopting his deep, authoritative, executive voice. "I am dealing with a massive personal situation right now, and I need the full force of the legal department immediately. I need you to draft an aggressive cease and desist order and prepare to file a massive defamation and extortion lawsuit against my sister-in-law. She is trying to blackmail me with illegally obtained documents, and I want her entirely ruined by Monday morning." The line was completely silent for a long, agonizing moment. There was no confident agreement from the powerful corporate lawyer. There was no immediate promise to deploy the legal team to destroy me. Only the faint sound of heavy breathing could be heard through the small speaker. Richard. Are you listening to me? Preston demanded, gripping the edge of the glass table so tightly his knuckles turned white. I said I need you to file a lawsuit right now. You need to handle this immediately. When the corporate lawyer finally spoke, his voice did not boom with corporate authority or aggressive confidence. Instead, it was a thin, trembling whisper that sounded like a man who was fighting to keep his own job and stay out of legal trouble himself. Preston the lawyer stammered, taking a shaky breath. I cannot file anything for you. I am not calling to help you with a personal lawsuit. Preston frowned heavily, his face twisting in deep confusion. What do you mean you cannot help me? He snapped, his voice rising in panic. I am the chief financial officer of this company. I am a senior executive. I am your superior. You work for me, Richard. You do what I tell you to do. I do not work for you anymore, Preston the lawyer replied, his voice cracking slightly over the speakerphone. And as of 10 minutes ago, neither do you. The chaotic screaming in the backyard instantly died. Aaliyah stopped crying and turned her head toward the table. DeAndre stopped pacing. Vivian slowly lowered her hands from her ears. The only sound left in the entire world was the gentle summer breeze rustling the leaves of the oak trees and the terrifying, trembling voice coming from the small device on the glass patio table. What the hell are you talking about? Preston demanded, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. I am the chief financial officer. You cannot fire me over the phone on a holiday weekend. I am not firing you, Preston. The lawyer continued, his voice shaking even more. The board of directors is firing you. The executive accounts have just been locked. Your corporate access badges have been electronically deactivated. Security is currently boxing up your office under the direct supervision of federal auditors. Preston stumbled backward, his legs giving out completely. He collapsed heavily into his patio chair, staring at the phone as if it had turned into a venomous snake. Auditors. He repeated the word, barely making it past his dry lips. Yes, Preston, the lawyer whispered, sounding genuinely terrified. All of your corporate accounts have been entirely frozen. We are under a massive external investigation. And Preston, I strongly advise you to hire independent criminal defense counsel immediately because the company is not going to protect you. We are handing everything over to the authorities. The white savior? The arrogant corporate executive. The man who had just promised to wipe the floor with me was now staring into the abyss of his own total destruction. His corporate empire had just crumbled into dust right in front of his fraudulent family. Preston leaned closer to the phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold himself up against the glass table. Richard, you have to listen to me, Preston pleaded, his voice completely stripped of its usual booming arrogance. There must be some kind of administrative error. I have been with this company for 8 years. I built the financial infrastructure from the ground up. You cannot just let them lock me out without a formal hearing. Who ordered this audit? Who is doing this to me? The lawyer let out a long, weary sigh through the speakerphone. It is not an administrative error, Preston Richard replied, his voice sounding incredibly distant and cold. The forensic accounting team has been quietly reviewing your department for the last 72 hours. They found massive discrepancies in the offshore vendor accounts. They tracked unauthorized wire transfers directly back to your personal shell companies. You did not just mismanage funds, Preston. You systematically siphoned over $1.5 million from the corporate treasury over the last 2 years. A collective gasp echoed across the patio. Vivian clutched her chest, her eyes rolling back slightly as if she was about to completely lose consciousness. DeAndre stared at his son-in-law, his mouth opening and closing in absolute shock. The man who had just threatened to destroy me with his corporate lawyers was now being officially accused of stealing $1.5 million from his own employer. I did not steal anything, Preston yelled, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, frantic squeak. It was a temporary relocation of liquid assets. I was going to put it all back after my quarterly bonus cleared. It was just a bridge loan to cover some bad investments. Richard, you know how aggressive the market has been. You have to explain this to the board. Tell them I will pay back every single penny with interest. I cannot tell them anything, Richard stated flatly. The board of directors does not even have the power to stop this anymore. The company was quietly acquired last week by a massive private equity firm. The new majority shareholder completely cleaned house. They brought in their own aggressive external auditors to evaluate the corporate ledgers before the merger was finalized. They are the ones who found your hidden accounts, Preston. They are the ones who immediately flagged the embezzled funds and locked you out of the building. Preston's face turned a sickly shade of gray. The heavy summer heat seemed to press down on him, suffocating him entirely. A private equity firm, Preston whispered, staring blankly at the phone. Which firm, Richard? Who bought the company? Richard hesitated for a moment, the line filling with static. I do not have the exact name of the parent company right now, Richard explained. The acquisition was executed through a highly confidential proxy firm. But the new majority shareholder signed the audit directive personally. They made it absolutely clear that they want you prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. They specifically instructed the legal department not to offer you any severance packages or settlement deals. They want you completely destroyed, Preston. They are going straight to the federal authorities with the evidence. Aaliyah let out a horrifying, piercing wail. She scrambled backward on the patio, her expensive dress scraping against the rough stone. $1.5 million, Aaliyah screamed, staring at her husband as if he had suddenly turned into a monster. You stole over $1 million and we are still completely broke. Where did all the money go, Preston? Where is it? Preston did not answer her. He could not answer her. He just stared at the glowing screen of his cell phone, his mind completely failing to process the magnitude of his sudden downfall. I will tell you exactly where the money went, I said, my voice cutting through the panic like a sharp blade. Everyone on the patio slowly turned to look at me. I placed my iced tea down on the table and leaned forward, folding my hands neatly together. It went to unregulated offshore sports betting platforms, I stated calmly, watching Preston's eyes widen in sheer, unadulterated terror. It went to high-stakes underground poker games and massive gambling debts. You see, Aaliyah, your brilliant, perfect husband is not just a fraud and a terrible financial officer. He is a severe gambling addict. He lost his own money years ago, and then he started stealing from his company to chase his massive losses. He convinced himself that one big win would magically fix everything. But the house always wins, Aaliyah, and now he has completely lost. How do you know that? Preston whispered, his voice trembling so badly he could barely form the words. How could you possibly know about the offshore betting platforms? I used encrypted servers. I used ghost accounts. Nobody knew about that. Not even Richard knew about that. I smiled warmly at him. A genuine bright smile that completely terrified him. You really are incredibly arrogant, Preston, I said, shaking my head slowly. You thought you were the smartest person in every single room you walked into. You thought you could hide your massive corporate theft behind complex spreadsheets and fake offshore vendor invoices. But you forgot the number one rule of the corporate world. There is always a bigger fish. Preston stared at me, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. He looked at the thick folder of documents sitting on the table. He looked at the private investigator report sitting next to it. And then his eyes slowly trailed down to the glowing screen of my smartphone, which was still mirroring my private banking profile, to the large television mounted on the brick wall. No, Preston choked out, stumbling backward away from the table. No, that is completely impossible. You are just a low-level clerk. You push papers. Richard the lawyer spoke up again from the speakerphone, his voice cutting through the heavy tension. Preston, I have to hang up now. The federal investigators are walking onto the executive floor. They have warrants for your digital devices and your physical files. I am officially advising you to retain criminal counsel and do not contact anyone from this company ever again. The line went completely dead. A sharp, harsh beep echoed across the yard. signaling the absolute end of Preston's corporate career. The silence returned, but it was no longer the silence of anticipation. It was the heavy, crushing silence of total annihilation. My father DeAndre sat perfectly still, his mouth hanging open, unable to comprehend how his perfect son-in-law was now facing decades in federal prison. My mother Vivian looked like she was completely disassociated from reality, staring blankly at the burning barbecue grill. Aaliyah was curled into a tight ball on the ground, weeping hysterically for her completely ruined life. Preston remained standing, his eyes locked firmly on my face. The pieces were finally clicking together in his desperate, panicked brain. The venture capital firm that owned his house, the private investigator who dug into his finances, the sudden, highly confidential acquisition of his corporate employer. "Who are you?" Preston whispered, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "What did you do?" I reached into the very bottom of my designer tote bag one last time. I pulled out a heavy black binder with the corporate logo of the private equity firm embossed on the front cover. I dropped it onto the glass patio table, right next to the puddle of spilled sweet tea and the pile of past-due credit card bills. The loud thud made my mother flinch in her seat. I looked down at Preston, who was still sitting on the ground staring at me with hollow, empty eyes. I gestured toward the black binder. "That is the preliminary forensic audit report." I explained, my voice perfectly calm and measured. "It contains every single transaction you tried to hide over the last 24 months. It details exactly how a highly paid corporate executive managed to completely bankrupt himself and steal $1.5 million from his own employer." Preston did not move to open the binder. He just continued to stare at me, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. Aaliyah, however, crawled across the stone patio and grabbed the heavy book. Her hands were shaking violently as she flipped open the thick cover. She stared at the endless pages of spreadsheets and highlighted bank transfers. "Tell her what you did, Preston," I commanded, stepping away from the table. "Tell your perfect wife exactly where all that money went. Because it certainly did not go toward buying her a real house or authentic designer handbags." Preston remained completely silent, his face buried in his hands. "Fine, I will tell her," I said, turning my attention to Aaliyah, who was desperately trying to make sense of the complex financial documents. "Your husband is not an aggressive market investor, Aaliyah. He is a severe sports betting addict. He started small a few years ago, placing wagers on offshore gambling websites. He lost a little bit of money at first, but then the addiction completely took over his brain. He started chasing his losses with bigger and bigger bets. When he drained his own savings, he started taking out those predatory payday loans just to fund his gambling accounts." Aaliyah looked up from the binder, her eyes wide with sheer disbelief. "Sports betting," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the neighborhood fireworks popping in the distance. "You lost everything on sports betting." "He did not just lose everything," I corrected sharply. "He lost everything, and then he decided to start stealing to keep the game going. When the payday loans dried up and his credit cards were completely maxed out, he realized he had direct access to the corporate treasury. He created fake vendor profiles in the company accounting system. He generated fraudulent invoices for software services that never existed. Then he wired the corporate funds directly into shell accounts in the Cayman Islands, which immediately funneled the money into his offshore gambling profiles." DeAndre let out a low, agonizing groan from his spot against the brick barbecue pit. My father, the man who had committed identity theft to fund a fake cosmetic line, was now listening to the exact details of how his golden son-in-law had committed massive corporate treason. "He stole $1.5 million, I repeated, letting the massive number hang in the heavy summer air. "He bet all of it on football games and basketball tournaments. And he lost every single penny. He is completely broke, Aaliyah. He has negative balances in every single bank account attached to his name. The luxury cars are being repossessed, the credit cards are frozen. The corporate salary is entirely gone. He does not even have enough money to buy a cheap bus ticket out of the state, let alone hire a decent criminal defense attorney to keep himself out of federal prison. Aaliyah dropped the heavy black binder onto the stone pavers. She looked at Preston with a mixture of absolute disgust and profound terror. She had built her entire identity around being the wealthy, privileged wife of a powerful white executive. She had mocked me, ridiculed me, and flaunted her fake success in my face for years. And now she was sitting on the ground next to a man who had literally gambled their entire existence away on a smartphone application. "You promised me a perfect life!" Aaliyah screamed at him, her voice cracking with pure hysterical rage. "You told me you were a genius. You told me we were better than everyone else. We have a child, Preston. How are we supposed to feed our child? How are we supposed to survive when you owe $1 million to a corporation and you are going to jail?" Preston finally lifted his head from his hands. His face was a twisted mask of desperation and absolute fury. The reality of his complete destruction was finally sinking into his arrogant brain. He looked at his weeping wife, and then he looked at my parents, who were staring at him with undisguised contempt. He had lost their worship. He had lost his corporate power. He had lost everything. And then his bloodshot eyes locked onto me, the black woman he had viewed as a pathetic subordinate, the woman he had threatened to forcefully evict from her own property just an hour ago. He saw me standing there, perfectly calm, perfectly composed, completely untouched by the massive explosion that had just leveled his entire world. The stark contrast between my absolute triumph and his absolute ruin snapped whatever fragile thread of sanity he had left. "You did this to me," Preston hissed, his voice vibrating with a dark, menacing tone. "You set me up, Sienna. You bought that company just to look into my files. You planned this entire thing to destroy my family because you are a jealous, bitter woman." I laughed softly, shaking my head at his relentless delusion. "I did not force you to place those bets, Preston," I reminded him. "I did not force you to forge those corporate invoices. I did not force you to cheat on your wife or lie about your wealth. I simply bought a struggling tech company that happened to employ a massive fraud. Uncovering your embezzlement was just a wonderful bonus to my investment strategy. You dug your own grave, Preston. I just happened to be the one who owns the cemetery." Vivian buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The community shame was going to be unbearable. She would never be able to show her face at Sunday service again. DeAndre stared blankly at the grass, completely paralyzed by the impending reality of his own criminal charges. The perfect family cookout was officially a crime scene of financial ruin. Preston could not handle the cold, hard truth. His massive, fragile ego simply could not process the fact that he had been completely outsmarted and overpowered by someone he considered entirely beneath him. He let out a primal, furious roar that echoed violently across the backyard. His face turned a deep, dangerous shade of purple as the veins in his neck bulged against his skin. "I am going to kill you!" Preston screamed, his voice completely devoid of any human rationality. He scrambled to his feet, his expensive leather shoes slipping slightly on the spilled sweet tea. He lunged across the glass patio table, knocking over chairs and sending the heavy black audit binder crashing to the ground. His hands were outstretched, his fingers curled into tight claws aiming directly for my throat. He wanted to physically destroy the person who had just dismantled his entire fraudulent life. Aaliyah shrieked in terror, scrambling backward to get out of his way. Vivian screamed my name, her hands flying up to cover her eyes. DeAndre remained frozen against the brick wall, completely useless to stop the massive, enraged man charging toward his youngest daughter. But I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I did not even raise my hands to defend myself. I just stood there watching him launch his entire body weight across the patio. Because I knew something that nobody else in my family had bothered to notice all afternoon. I had not come to this hostile environment completely unprotected. Before Preston's hands could even come close to touching me, the three men who had been quietly tending to the barbecue grill suddenly exploded into motion. All afternoon, my family had completely ignored them, treating them like invisible hired help. They had assumed I just ordered some random local catering service to handle the holiday food. They never questioned why the men serving the ribs and burgers were built like professional linebackers and moving with such precise, calculated efficiency. The man closest to the grill instantly dropped his heavy metal tongs. He closed the distance between the barbecue pit and the patio table in less than 2 seconds. He hit Preston from the side with the force of a speeding freight train. The impact was deafening. Preston was knocked completely off his feet, his heavy body flying sideways through the air. He crashed hard onto the stone pavers, letting out a sharp, agonizing gasp as the wind was violently knocked out of his lungs. Before Preston could even attempt to recover, the other two men were already on top of him. They moved with absolute military precision. One man pinned Preston's legs to the ground, driving his knee sharply into the back of Preston's thighs to prevent him from kicking. The second man grabbed Preston's flailing arms, twisting them forcefully behind his back with a swift, practiced motion that signaled years of tactical training. "Get off me!" Preston choked out, struggling wildly against their massive weight. "Let me go! I am going to end her. Do not move a single muscle," the lead security operative commanded, his voice deep and completely devoid of any emotion. He pressed his forearm firmly against the back of Preston's neck, holding his face down against the rough stone patio. "You are currently detained for attempted assault. If you continue to resist, we will use maximum physical force to subdue you. Do you understand me?" Preston groaned in pain, his cheek grinding against the hard pavers. He stopped struggling, realizing he was completely trapped beneath three men who could easily snap his bones if he made another aggressive move. Aaliyah sat completely frozen, staring at the men holding her husband down. "Who are these people?" she whispered, her voice shaking with absolute terror. "Sienna, what is happening?" I casually brushed a speck of dust off the front of my dress. "They are my private security detail," I explained calmly, walking around the shattered remains of the patio table to stand directly over Preston. "When you are the chief executive officer of a major venture capital firm, you do not attend family gatherings without proper protection, especially when you know that family is filled with desperate criminals and emotional manipulators." DeAndre stared at the security operatives, his eyes wide with profound shock. "You brought armed bodyguards to a family cookout?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I brought highly trained professionals to a hostile environment, Daddy?" I corrected him, never taking my eyes off Preston, who was still breathing heavily against the stone. "And it seems I made the absolute right decision. Because the moment the white savior realized he had lost all his power, his immediate instinct was to resort to violent physical assault against a black woman. How incredibly predictable." The lead operative looked up at me, awaiting my direct orders. "Ma'am," the operative said, his tone completely professional. "Do you want us to hold him until the authorities arrive?" "The police perimeter should be secured in approximately 3 minutes according to the dispatch timeline." Vivian gasped loudly, her hands flying to her mouth. "The police!" Vivian cried, her voice echoing with sheer panic. "Sienna, you called the police to our house." "Of course I called the police, Mother," I replied, turning my head to look at her terrified face. "I filed the federal fraud reports yesterday, but I called the local precinct about 20 minutes before I arrived here today. I informed them that a man wanted for massive corporate embezzlement and a man wanted for federal identity theft would both be conveniently located in this exact backyard. I also mentioned that the suspect might become highly volatile when confronted with the evidence." Aaliyah began to sob uncontrollably, pulling her knees to her chest and rocking back and forth. Her perfect holiday weekend had officially turned into a nightmare she could never wake up from. DeAndre slumped entirely against the brick wall, his chin resting on his chest, accepting the total defeat of his pathetic criminal life. Preston lay pinned against the ground, his expensive polo shirt torn and stained with spilled tea and dirt. He looked up at me from the stone pavers, his arrogant facade completely shattered into a million irreversible pieces. He was a broken, bankrupt criminal, completely at the mercy of the woman he had spent years trying to destroy. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, satisfying sense of closure. The long, toxic chapter of my family history was finally ending right here on this stone patio. The sirens began to wail loudly in the distance, growing closer and closer with every passing second. The final act of their destruction was officially underway. The wail of the sirens grew deafening as multiple police cruisers turned onto the quiet suburban street. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the pristine white brick of the luxury estate, casting eerie shadows across the stone patio. I stood perfectly still, watching the inevitable conclusion to decades of abuse and manipulation finally arrive at my doorstep. Aaliyah scrambled away from the patio table, pressing her back against the glass sliding door as if she could somehow merge with the house and disappear. Vivian dropped her face into her hands, rocking back and forth while letting out low, guttural moans. DeAndre remained slumped against the brick barbecue pit, his eyes fixed blankly on the grass. 4 uniformed police officers and 2 plainclothes detectives stepped through the wooden side gate. The heavy thud of their boots on the stone pavers commanded absolute authority. The lead security operative holding Preston on the ground immediately identified himself to the approaching officers. He slowly released his grip and stepped back, allowing the police to take over the scene. Preston groaned as 2 officers grabbed his arms and hauled him to his feet. His expensive designer polo shirt was ripped at the collar and covered in dark stains from the spilled sweet tea. He looked nothing like a powerful corporate executive. He looked exactly like the pathetic, desperate thief he truly was. "Preston, you are being placed under arrest." A detective stated, his voice flat and professional. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest on multiple charges of corporate embezzlement and wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Preston did not fight back. He did not yell or threaten to call his highly paid corporate lawyers. The fight was completely drained out of him. He just hung his head in absolute shame as the cold metal handcuffs clicked tightly around his wrists. The sharp metallic sound echoed across the patio, signifying the end of his entire fraudulent existence. Aaliyah watched in sheer terror as her husband was marched toward the side gate. "Preston," she whimpered, her voice barely a whisper, but he did not even look back at her. He kept his eyes locked on the ground, too humiliated to face the woman he had destroyed his life to impress. But the police were not finished. The second detective walked directly past the shattered patio table and stopped right in front of my father. DeAndre slowly lifted his head, looking up at the detective with eyes full of overwhelming defeat. "DeAndre, I need you to stand up," the detective ordered. Vivian suddenly snapped out of her trance. She jumped up from her chair and rushed toward the detective, waving her hands frantically. "No, please, you cannot take him!" Vivian cried. "He is a good man. He made a mistake for his family. You have the wrong person. Please leave my husband alone." An officer stepped in front of my mother, holding his hand out to stop her from interfering. "Mom, you need to step back immediately, or you will be charged with obstruction," the officer warned sternly. DeAndre reached out and gently touched my mother's arm. "Let it go, Vivian," my father whispered, his voice cracking with the weight of his own guilt. "It is over." DeAndre slowly pushed himself up from the ground. His knees trembled slightly under his own weight. He looked old and incredibly frail. The arrogant patriarch who had constantly belittled my achievements and threatened to ruin my credit score was entirely gone. In his place stood an exhausted criminal who had gambled his freedom to support a spoiled child. The detective read DeAndre his rights as the second pair of handcuffs was secured around his wrists. The charges were clear and devastating: identity theft, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. DeAndre looked over at me one last time before the officers led him away. There was no anger left in his eyes. There was only the haunting realization that he had sacrificed the daughter who could have given him everything, for the daughter who had left him with absolutely nothing. I watched them walk my father and my brother-in-law out through the wooden gate. I could hear the distant chatter of the nosy neighbors who had undoubtedly gathered on the sidewalks to witness the spectacle. The perfect family image was completely shattered in front of the entire community. The police cruiser's doors slammed shut, and the engines roared to life, driving away with the two men who had tried to manipulate and control my entire life. The backyard fell completely silent again. The barbecue grill had finally burned itself out, leaving nothing but a pile of gray ash. The summer sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the absolute devastation of the patio. Aaliyah slowly pushed herself away from the glass door. She crawled across the stone pavers until she was kneeling right at my feet. Her perfect makeup was entirely ruined. Her expensive dress was torn and dirty. She looked up at me with wide, desperate eyes, completely stripped of her golden child entitlement. "Sienna, please, Aaliyah," begged, her voice breaking into heavy sobs. "I have nothing left. Preston is going to prison. The bank accounts are frozen. The cars are gone. I do not have a single dollar to my name. You have to help me. We are sisters, Sienna. We share the same blood. You cannot just leave me and my baby out on the street. I will do whatever you want. I will get a job. I will pay you rent. Just please do not take my house away." I looked down at her, feeling a profound sense of detachment. She was invoking the word sister as if it were a magical spell that could instantly erase decades of emotional abuse and betrayal. She only remembered we were family when she had absolutely no one else left to use. I reached into my designer tote bag for the very last time. I pulled out a single sheet of paper printed on heavy official letterhead. I held it out and dropped it right into her trembling hands. "That is a formal 24-hour notice of eviction," I stated, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy. "Blue Ridge Holdings is officially placing this property on the market tomorrow morning. You have exactly 1 day to pack your fake designer bags and vacate the premises. If you are still inside this house by tomorrow evening, my property manager will arrive with the local sheriff to physically remove you." Aaliyah stared at the eviction notice, her mouth opening in a silent scream. "You cannot do this," she choked out, clutching the paper to her chest. "Where am I supposed to go? How am I supposed to survive?" "That is absolutely not my problem, Aaliyah," I replied, turning away from her. "You spent your entire life believing you were superior to me. You spent your entire life taking exactly what you wanted without ever considering the consequences. Now it is time for you to figure out how the real world actually works." I picked up my tote bag and adjusted the strap over my shoulder. I looked over at my mother, who was sitting in her patio chair, staring blankly at the pile of ashes in the barbecue grill. She did not speak. She did not look at me. Her mind had completely shut down, unable to process the total destruction of her carefully curated reality. "Goodbye, Mother," I said softly. She did not answer. I turned my back on the stone patio and walked toward the wooden side gate. I signaled for my private security detail to follow me. As I stepped through the gate and walked down the long paved driveway, I felt an immense physical weight lift completely off my shoulders. The air smelled cleaner, the evening breeze felt cooler. My sleek black luxury sport utility vehicle was parked right at the curb. The driver immediately stepped out and opened the rear door for me. I climbed inside the cool leather interior, and the heavy door closed securely behind me, blocking out the sounds of Aaliyah's distant weeping. "Drive," I instructed my chauffeur. The vehicle pulled away from the curb, leaving the neighborhood and the toxic ruins of my biological family far behind me. I looked out the tinted window, watching the familiar streets blur into the distance. For so long, I had allowed their expectations and their cruelty to dictate my self-worth. I had allowed the cultural pressure of family loyalty to keep me tethered to people who would gladly watch me drown if it meant they could stand on my shoulders to breathe. But going strictly no contact was the most powerful decision I ever made. The concept that blood is thicker than water is a manipulation tactic used by toxic people to avoid accountability. True family is not determined by shared genetics or a common last name. True family is built on mutual respect, unwavering support, and unconditional love. I had spent years building my own chosen family. My business partners, my genuine friends, and the people who celebrated my victories instead of trying to steal them. As the city lights began to sparkle in the evening dusk, I realized that cutting them off was not an act of revenge. It was an act of profound self-preservation. I had finally protected the little girl who used to hide in her bedroom, and I had secured the future of the woman who had built an empire from absolutely nothing. If you are listening to this right now and you are trapped in a cycle of toxic family dynamics, I want you to know that you have the absolute right to walk away. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire simply to keep abusive people warm. Your peace is worth far more than their conditional approval. Establish your boundaries, enforce them without apology, and never be afraid to close the door on anyone who disrespects your existence. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your own peace? How did you find the strength to enforce those difficult boundaries? I would love to read your stories of survival and healing in the comments below. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more stories about finding your power and reclaiming your life. Thank you so much for listening to my journey today, and remember, your success is the best closure you will ever need.